Welcome to our Enterprise Blockchain, the Path to Monetization workshop. My name is Guido Molinari, and I'm the managing partner at Prysm Group. In today's workshop, we are going to be discussing with a number of industry leaders that are going to be joining us over the next 3 hours. I'm going to be kicking things off with a brief introduction about us, Prysm Group, and presenting a couple of frameworks that we can use when thinking about some of the insights that the various speakers are going to be sharing with us this afternoon. And then I'm going to be leading the first set of fireside chats, where we're going to have joining us Mariana Gomez de la Villa from ING Bank, Dimitro Migliorati from Banca Mediolanum, Olaf Ransom from Finality International, and Riccardo Turbiani from Microsoft. After that, I'm going to be giving the floor to my colleague Rick Cataldo, who is going to be hosting a session with speakers joining us from Ireland and the US East Coast. We're going to be having with us Jaron McGowan from WeTrade, Shyam Nagarajan from IBM, Chen Zhe from Ernst & Young, and Daniel Wilson from TradeLens, and Mark Treshock from IBM Pharmaceutical Utility Network. After that, I'm going to be coming back, and with me, there's going to be another set of speakers joining us from the US Midwest and the Rockies. Among them, there's going to be Adam Kaplan from Salesforce, Merrick Vass from United Healthcare, the Synaptic Health Alliance, and David Post from IBM Trust Your Supplier. We're going to then take some key takeaways together with Cathy Barrera, our founding economist at Prysm Group, and we're going to draw some conclusions together from today's workshop. So we're now being joined by Dr. Cathy Barrera, Prysm Group founding economist. Cathy, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
How are you doing today?
Good. How are you doing, Guido?
Good.
It's been a great session here.
Wonderful. So I'm going to share back my screen, this slide that I added at the very beginning. This, as I mentioned at the beginning of our workshop, is the blockchain monetization framework that working with dozens of enterprise customers will put together, thinking about the key 3 milestones and all the tasks that lead to achieving each of the milestones. So Cathy, you've been listening to the great lineup of speakers that we've had in the last 3 hours. What are some of the key takeaways from of the items that the speakers have mentioned, and how do you overlay these key takeaways on the framework that we have here on this page?
Absolutely. So again, I think that there were so many wonderful insights from the variety of speakers today. One thing I would highlight first is just this first phase of this monetization process starts with the economic white paper. And while this is the highest level piece of work that's done throughout this process, it's really the most important because it lays the groundwork for building out a network that can have long-term success and that can really draw all kinds of members from the relevant industry into participation and generate those kinds of network effects. So this is really a planning stage that allows you to leverage those network effects in a way that can build the network out sort of more easily or with less upfront investment. So a few things I would highlight that the speaker said earlier are, one, starting with the simplest use case and putting in place the right infrastructure. So this came up several times among the different participants. So, we think that it's really important to start with a really targeted, simple use case that can demonstrate immediate value to whichever stakeholders you're targeting first. So I know that Olaf mentioned early on in the session that really identifying those inefficiencies in the banking industry was really important. Finality in being able to demonstrate the potential for value add or monetization for potential members. And then we also heard from Kieran from WeTrade and from Daniel from TradeLens of the importance of starting with something really simple. In fact, I think Kieran mentioned don't build the Ferrari first. You don't necessarily need to have all those bells and whistles in the first draft of or the first use case that you deploy. And I think that that's super important in developing a sustainable network. I think that the things that I would highlight about this phase are figuring out among the many things that you want the network to be able to eventually do, starting with the one element that's going to demonstrate early value to your users and that can be easily built out. The second thing that I would really highlight, and this is sort of at the bottom here of this first column, is making sure that your infrastructure is built in a way that's going to attract all of the right participants to the platform, and it's not going to deter participation because there's sort of too much control. And I think this is something that Chen from EY sort of highlighted, is the importance of outsourcing key elements of the infrastructure so that they're available to the participants and they don't have to worry about issues like hold up. So as I said, this white paper phase is really about thinking through how can we plant a seed? How can we start with something that's going to have high value? And then what are the steps we envision taking in order to build that network out over time? So we want to start with one use case, and we want to think about in what order prioritize the additional use cases or the additional features that we want to build out in order to leverage the early success that we have. So we're likely to start with sort of one set of stakeholders, and in a platform like Finality or a platform like Spunta, you're talking about banks, but eventually you might want to bring on other types of participants. So for example, WeTrade needs both banks and also vendors in order to function. So how can you sort of build out your early success with the banks in order to draw in those vendors that you need? And so this will look a little bit different for networks that are functioning in different industries. It won't necessarily be banks and vendors. It may be insurance companies and healthcare providers. It may be workers and universities or credential providers. But you want to think about what are these different participants that we're eventually going to need to draw in, and how can we order our features in a way that will sort of create a snowball effect and make it easier for us to bring them on board over time. So this white paper process sort of helps to create that plan in a deliberate way, instead of using sort of trial and error, to map out where it is we're trying to go. And then we can build on that in phases 2 and 3, getting into more detail regarding exactly how this network is going to look and how value is going to be delivered to the different participants. So in the monetization blue paper phase, we sort of go through looking in more detail into each of the different groups of stakeholders and exactly how they're going to derive value from the use of the network. So that's going to depend on the specific use cases that we've decided on and the priority order of those use cases. And I think several members, several participants in this session sort of alluded to these types of issues. So Spunta is very lucky, as several of the participants noted, that they have an industry organization that's basically mandated participation from all of the banks. But most networks are going to have to grow organically. They're going to have to attract each and every participant into the network. And how can we think about doing that? So we want to be thoughtful again about those features that we're going to roll out and the order in which we're going to roll out these use cases. And then we want to start thinking more carefully about, okay, so we started with the banks, we started with one type of user. Now we're adding in these vendors or this other type of user, and that secondary stakeholder has different needs, and we should think about how we're going to specifically appeal to the needs and the values of those new stakeholders that we're adding to the system. And along with that, we want to think about how can we carefully monetize this network. So we want to make sure that we're able to draw out value early enough that we have sustainability, but we don't want to move too early that we sort of dampen the growth of the network. So obviously, the more money is charged to potential users, that sort of creates a disincentive to join the network in the first place. I know that Mark from IBM highlighted that you know, the infrastructure that they're providing is entirely free, and it's just for the fund network, and it's just those the use cases that are built on top that the users have to pay for. And so, you know, we can think very carefully about exactly what systems we're going to use in order to price the network, in order to price things like membership, general subscription fees, versus pricing usage of the different components of the network. And all of those sort of go into the plan of how we're going to push this network forward for growth, and also ensure that we can monetize and we can create sustainability instead of continuously having to reinvest into the network. So those were, I thought, very important themes that we heard throughout. Finally, in stage 3, we started getting to the nitty-gritty details of how to execute the functioning of the network in order to really drive value. So this phase is all about creating the right incentives so that value will be generated and distributed among the different participants and members in the way that we originally envisioned, right? So we want to make sure that that everyone is actually receiving the value that's promised, right? So if we're creating a network that's for tracking certifications or credentials, we need to make sure that those credentials can actually be verified. Now, that's a much different problem than if we're trying to track freight containers. And so the incentives designed around those two very, very different use cases have to be completely different. And this speaks to the true functioning of the network, right? So we need to eventually be able to execute on the promise of what the network will do, and that requires participants to do their part and to take the actions that they need to take.